So if you haven't yet, take the time to find supports for your body so you'll be able to sit comfortably for the loving kindness meditation. And tonight we'll, in particular, tune into this capacity, this quality of the heart we call equanimity. And really, hopefully, learn something tonight about balance and evenness as a capacity of love, quality of love. It really helps us to connect and respond and live our lives. And you probably know that, in some circles at least, equanimity, balance, it gets a bad rap, and maybe even appropriately so, because it can look like indifference. And for sure, it's probably true for every particular mental quality, heart quality. There are shadows to equanimity. So that's why it does sometimes get a bad rap, because people use it as a kind of way of avoiding feeling and responding, as a way out of relationship instead of into relationship with our lives and what's moving and happening around us. So we have to, reform and begin again and take a fresh look, because perhaps the Buddha refers to as equanimity, upekkha, this profound, enlivened balance of the heart, a very bright, a very alive quality of the heart that isn't thrown off balance when things are really confusing or uncertain, or when there's a lot moving in my heart, in the world that I live in, like a time like this, where there's a lot moving, regardless of where we're located culturally, there's a lot moving. And so the relevant question is, what does love look like now? What is real love, trustworthy love, love that knows how to be intimate and how to respond from that place of connection? What does it look like when things are really confusing and intense and all over the place? And this is where we uncover the heart's capacity for equanimity, this profound and powerful balance that allows the mind, the heart, even the body, allows it to tolerate profound confusion and uncertainty and disturbance. And this place of balance, the mind doesn't need to act, but it's not afraid of action, of showing up and doing what needs to be done. So it's really in this balanced or neutral place where it's really happy, like our action, what we say, even what we think, what we do and what we don't do, it arises out of the moment instead of, oh, I have to act because I'm uncomfortable not acting, or I'm not going to act because I'm uncomfortable acting. So much of how we show up in the world comes from a fixed stance. We have a story, have an idea of who we are, and an idea of what's happening, and our action, our way of showing up comes out of that. And as I understand the teachings of the Buddha and this practice of valuing presence, this intimate presence more and more, no matter the particular circumstance, it's really pointing to a much more alive and nimble and creative and unfixed way of responding and showing up. So it's not so much I'm trying to figure out how to show up in my life in the different relationships, the different circumstances, as it is I'm really learning how to stay connected. I'm really learning how to be intimate, and that balance of equanimity is required to be intimate. That evenness, that it's really that non-fear. How can I really connect with the moment when I'm afraid? And how can I respond skillfully when I can't connect? So, a skillful response in each moment, which of course is going to be different moment by moment, a skillful response depends on connecting. And connecting depends on not being afraid. There's sort of I think, a provocative phrase or teaching from the Buddhist later traditions. I'm not even sure exactly. I think it comes out of the Mahayana Buddhist tradition, sometimes attributed to the teachings of Kuan Yin, this archetypal um, idea of responsivity and compassion. And the earlier depictions, this embodiment of compassion had many, many arms and many, many eyes to see the suffering of the world and to respond. And then in later Chinese Buddhism, Kuan Yin's depicted as sort of this feminine compassion that is boundless and unstoppable. And one of the teachings attributed to that sort of, just that archetype, is that life, circumstance, causes and conditions, stuff that happens, right? All the enormity of causes and conditions, the winds of circumstance, they blow through emptiness. Whom can they harm? And don't try to understand it, but it's really a pointing like that somehow we can be in the middle of the winds of circumstance, even inner circumstance, the different emotions that are getting triggered, different ideas and opinions that are getting triggered, outer circumstance, what's swirling and moving around me, people being wise, people being ignorant, all of that dance of inner and outer experience. That's the winds of circumstance, blow through emptiness. That teaching isn't telling us that we're not here or there's nothing here. It's really pointing to that balance, like the heart that isn't thrown around by the winds of circumstance. And it's that kind of heart that's not blown around. Doesn't mean we don't feel. It means there's something that remains, not afraid of what we're feeling, not afraid of what we're seeing, not afraid to be touched. So this is that misunderstanding that goes with equanimity, that somehow equanimity is the same as not being touched or not feeling anything, right? And then, then that really causes us to equate spiritual development with getting the hell out of here. So I don't feel and I don't see, and then I'll be fine. If only I weren't a human being, if only I didn't have a body, if only I didn't live in an unjust world, if only I didn't, and on like that, then things would be fine. But I don't know about you, but I think what I'm interested in, and I think most of us, what we're interested in, is a kind of stability right in the middle. That isn't even a stability and evenness, a wise and kind presence that's not even dependent on knowing what the heck I'm doing. Because at least that's what I can do. I can show up. And in that showing up, a response, if there's an appropriate response, there's something to do to contribute, then that response will come out of being connected with the moment. And if there's nothing in that moment to do but be present, be a witness to what's happening, to what's being felt here, and to whatever degree we can intuit out there, then that's what we contribute. Like that we're there and we're practicing not being afraid of being sensitive and being open. And I really trust that that's a helpful and even beautiful way to live a life. So that's just a little introduction to how in Buddhism, in the Buddhist teachings, we understand equanimity. And equanimity is both a quality of loving kindness, one of the Brahma Viharas, or the divine abodes, these radiant, immeasurable, boundless qualities that are used as a meditative anchor or meditation object to open the mind to beautiful and expansive and healing states. And it's also a very functional expression of deeper insight and wisdom. So it really has it's used in both of these contexts as a kind of a meditative object to open to very deep, quiet, expansive, beautiful states of mind, and as this very earthy, stable, and powerful quality in the heart that helps us navigate the sticky stuff of life. So let's get ready. Feel free to stretch your legs a little bit and then settle into meditation. And we'll sit for about 35 minutes together. And I'll give instructions for the meditation. And we're going to begin with a simple body scan meditation. Once you settle in, just start by taking a couple of longer, easy, deeper breaths in and out. Let's take the time to befriend the body. And of course, it may not be the way we want it to be, the sensations now in the body, but we can be sure this is the body, that it's like this now. And in the most simple way, opening to the different sensations in the face and in the head. You might start by simply feeling the weight of the hair and the scalp. And even though these sensations might be subtle or nondescript, just feel the scalp, top of the head, and include the back of the head, and the sides and the ears. Willing to receive, willing to connect. Feel the forehead and the brow and the temples. Very simple, kind willingness to connect, to feel. Feel the eyes, the eyelids touching the eyes, and the air touching the skin of the face. And we feel the structure of the jaw and the muscles here. Sense the hardness of the teeth and the wetness of the mouth. Noticing if the lips are touching or apart. And noticing the rhythm of breathing at the nostrils, or if you're breathing through your mouth, notice it there. And can we be, in this simple way, intimate with the head and face without needing to be tight, without needing to control things? A gentle and kind presence here. And let's take the time to do this now with the throat. Even if it feels tight, befriending the tightness in the throat and down through the sides of the neck and back of the neck as well. We're not trying to fix the tension or get rid of it. The intention is more simple, just to connect, to have an honest and clear relationship with what's moving, what's happening here in the neck. So that we can relearn what it is to be kind and what it is to be balanced and tender. So just continue feeling the tops of the shoulders down to the shoulder joints. And the most foundational expression of love is this willingness to keep in mind. So we're keeping the shoulders in mind, or we're not forgetting, we're not spacing out because we care. We're offering the gift of presence, feeling the shoulders, tops of the shoulders, from the sides of the neck down. Really getting a sense of what patience is, this beautiful quality of patience. And beginning now to feel both arms, the biceps and underarms. Notice where the clothes are touching the skin and the bend of the elbows, forearms, and any touch points down through the arms and where the hands touch. Feeling the sensations of the back of the hands. And be patient and take the time to feel each finger. Start with the pinkies and just move through to the thumbs. And be content to feel whatever you feel. This is such a simple and beautiful expression of kindness just to show up in this way. And we'll come down the front of the torso. We'll begin at the base of the throat. Front of the collarbones. Feel the structure of the rib cage and the front side. The little movement of the rib cage as it expands and contracts. And any sensations behind the rib cage. Down through the lower ribs and then the solar plexus. And the abdomen where the clothes touch. Any movement in the internal organs here. All the way down to the groin. Taking our time. And then back to the back of the neck. And same thing now on the back side of the torso. And including the side ribs as you go down. Take your time. Feel the spine in whatever way you can, in the back of the ribs. Kidneys. Down through the lower spine and the back of the hips. Right down to the sits bones and the floor of the pelvis. We'll take a little bit more time with kindness and just meet the entire torso. And let this be an act of simple kindness here. And from the hip sockets, feeling the thighs. A generous and kind presence with the thighs, not holding back as we keep them in mind. And then the bend of the knees, all the sensations here. And the shins and the calves. The ankles down to the heels. Sides and tops of the feet. Bottoms of the feet. And the toes. So for a while, we allow the body as sensation, to be the whole world. And we uncover a willingness to connect or to open to this world of the body, this world of sensation now. And we allow it to move, to be what it is, not picking and choosing, but a willingness to receive and to allow, letting the body as sensation move. And this is a real gift, a real act of kindness. Being present and letting the body move. And even if there's places that feel held or tight, willing to connect, willing to allow the tightness to be tight. We learn so much patience being present with the body. So much equanimity, knowing that these sensations that are here in the body can't be other than the way they are right now. That what makes sense is to allow these bodily sensations to come and go and do what they're going to do. Getting angry doesn't make sense. distracting or denying doesn't make sense. Being present in this kind way makes sense, not forgetting. And see if you can sense and appreciate and even abide in this subtle but beautiful quality of balance, equanimity. Equanimity with the conditions that are here in the body and the mind. Not for, not against anything now. But in a real way, we're letting nature be nature. Choosing not to be in conflict with what's coming and going. So more than being aware of the body, as it becomes clear, be aware of the equanimity with the body. This very generous, even radiant connection, this beautiful way of relating to the body that we call equanimity. I care about this body. I care enough to let the body be the body, knowing that the body is simply acting out its nature to be pleasant or unpleasant, healthy or unhealthy. I'm choosing not to be at war with the body now. Letting the breath be the breath, the heart pumping has permission to pump. I deeply trust the nature of the body to take care of itself as best it can. And sometimes the mind might need a little reminder, and it's okay to repeat a phrase or even a single word like balance, or the word equanimity, upekkha, if you want to use the Pali, or a phrase like things are the way that they are. I really care, and things are the way that they are right now. But don't feel like you need to repeat a phrase. If you can abide in this radiant balance, this inclusive balance of the heart and mind. And let the beauty and expansive love of equanimity, let it expand if it wants to expand. Don't force anything, of course. And I'll just put some words to it, but we're really tuning into something more subtle than the words. This quality of love we call equanimity. I understand that we live in a lawful universe, that things come and go according to many causes and conditions. The particular experience of this body is a lawful expression of causes and conditions. What I'm feeling in my heart, the thoughts in my mind, and the world I live in now, and all the people that I care about, and all the people I find troublesome. This is all nature. It's all lawful, a lawful unfolding of causes and conditions. But still I care, even though it's a lawful unfolding, can't be otherwise. Still I care. I care enough to be close and to feel and to see clearly, and in a sense to be touched by everything that's moving. I care enough to practice being unafraid and to wish well. May all beings, near and far, this heart right here, my dear ones, and those troublesome folks, may all beings find ease, well-being in this changing world. May we find the causes for freedom. May we release the causes for suffering. May we be at ease. So you can come back to your own version of that reflection whenever you need, a clear connection with equanimity, remembering that this is a lawful universe. Things come and go lawfully, conditionally, in this very complex, interdependent way. But still I care. I care enough to practice being unafraid, to practice being awake or intimate, and wishing well. May all of us living beings, sensitive beings, find ease in this changing world, this lawful changing world. May we be free from suffering and its causes. May we be at ease. So we'll continue in silence now for a while. See if you can learn to trust the subtle radiance of equanimity. We're letting balance be the object of awareness as best we can. So keeping this very real, very grounded. This balance or equanimity, it isn't theoretical. We're relying on it to show up with this experience right here. The experience of the body sitting, the quality of our heart and mind right now. So this is our relatively simple world during the guided meditation. And we're practicing showing up with this beautiful balance. A heart capable of being open and sensitive without fear. Willing to feel, willing to include what we're experiencing right now. And beyond this immediate world of sitting here where we're sitting and feeling the body, this greater, wider world, all the joys and all the very real sorrows and difficulties and injustice swirling and moving right now. Is it possible to be aware, to be open, to be touched by what's moving without losing the balance? The great sense of space, evenness. And this balance isn't dependent on anything, which is what gives it its real resilience, stability. May all beings be protected. May wisdom and love guide and protect all beings facing real change, real uncertainty, in this swirl of joy and sorrow that is our lives. And you might want to take a little time and stretch out your body, make sure you're comfortable. And although it's not all that convenient, it's our time now to have a conversation about how equanimity can be cultivated and used in our lives for not just our own well-being, but really as a way to contribute to the wider world. And, we can't hear each other, but we can use the chat line. And you see that there off to the right. And feel free at any point to write a question or even make a comment. And I'll just share a few things, and hopefully others will share some thoughts so that it can be somewhat interactive. But obviously, especially at this time, with more conscious looking at the roots of racism in our culture and police violence and the pandemic and economic insecurity that many people are facing, besides any number of other things that might be going on in people's lives and going around in the world globally, there's a lot moving. And of course, there's always a lot moving, but it certainly feels intense and rich where I'm sitting. And so, the relevant question, the obvious question really is how to be a human being when it's like this. And, I'm a relatively privileged human being. So many people, the intensity of what their experience is so much greater than mine. So it's still the same question though. How best as a human being in our swirling world with the great uncertainty and the truth of the aging body and all that and all that's in motion that we don't control, how to show up to that world, how to relate to uncertainty and insecurity, and even the ambiguity. Like one of the things that I think throws some of us more controlling types for a loop is we have developed, and maybe partly conditioned by society, it's sort of the cult of competency. Like, okay, life is complex, life is difficult, but I'll develop competency and I'll master this so I know what to do. And this can happen in the realm of parenting young children, or your job, or mastering and gaining competence in terms of your relationship with your partner, or any number of social issues. I'm somebody who understands the underlying roots of racism. I'm one of those good white people, or any number of those sort of imagined, like, oh, I'm there, so now I don't have to worry. I've mastered that. I know what I'm doing. And then what we do is we pretend that having some fixed idea, like I'm right, that kind of a fixed idea, somehow resolves the insecurity. But there's really, I think, what life has taught me at least, we don't ever get to that place of perfect competency, at least not on that level where my mind has so thoroughly comprehended what's going on, I actually know what to do with perfect confidence. Have you had that experience anywhere? I mean, we have that pretend experience a lot where we pretend that what we think we should do is certain. Like, no, I'm right. I really have thought this through. And it's true. I mean, we do learn. So there are places in our life where we have more clarity, more useful intuition, and places where we don't have much clarity or intuition. Our past experience isn't really informing what we should do or not do. So it's not to say that gaining competence isn't a good thing for human beings to do. Clearly, it's a useful thing, but it doesn't give us solid ground. So we should gain competence because it's a useful thing to do. It's a way to contribute to our own well-being and others, but it doesn't give us perfect security in any way. So in those places where we're having trouble gaining competence, they tend to be really good teachers for us. Whether it's, your relationship with a parent, or your relationship with a partner, or your relationship with some of these burning social issues like racism is so much more clear and alive these days. And we might realize that I don't know how to be a white person, or I don't, depending on your particular cultural location, or, how to show up in our place and contribute. And that can be really disturbing to know that we don't know. And that's really where equanimity comes in. It's really that quality of love and wisdom that doesn't need conditions. And in particular, my mind, my heart, and how it is understanding, it doesn't need things to be other than they are. That's why equanimity, although we use it as a quality of love, we experience it as a quality of love that can include, that can show up. It's that quality of love that's really informed by insight and wisdom. And in that way, it really is the foundation of every other kind of love, from basic friendliness to a fierce, compassionate response, to really appreciating what's good and beautiful, being grateful and appreciative. All of those qualities, the full range of love, needs equanimity, needs the wisdom of equanimity underneath. This more unshakable, unflappable, stable quality of the heart that isn't dependent on anything. Like if we have sort of some of us might have this where we need to be around suffering because that's our stance. I'm the compassionate one. Or we need to be around beautiful things to appreciate. But when that equanimity is well understood and well developed, then when things inevitably change, the mind isn't disturbed because it wasn't dependent. It wasn't practicing being dependent. Okay, this is where I feel comfortable. This is where I feel competent. And then we get dependent. And then if we're dependent on that particular circumstance, then whether we see it or not, we're afraid of it changing because I feel comfortable here, but I don't feel comfortable with it changing. And we can really resist. And Carolyn mentions in the chat, if you haven't read it, I've been feeling numb lately. For a sensitive person, this is unusual. I'm sad and am having a hard time not feeling judgment about this. Yeah, and remember, we don't want to just rely on the first look, like that, what we might call numbness and sadness. Just keep looking at what that is, because, yeah, it might be numb, it might be sad, but it might also be a kind of wisdom that knows that I don't have to react, or I don't even have to act. And in some places, not every place in our life, but in some places in our life where we neurotically feel compelled to react or respond, it's a real gift to tell ourselves, you can show up, you can feel what you're feeling, but don't feel like you have to do anything. You can do something, you can respond, but I'm giving myself permission, I'm giving the heart permission just to be present. Because ultimately we want to get to that place where the heart, the mind, isn't compelled neurotically to do and isn't compelled neurotically to avoid doing. That doesn't have that fixed stance. And we're, like I said at the beginning, we're more interested in cultivating that presence, that even presence, that very nimble. And we're kind of giving it over to nature, the enormity of causes and conditions that are internal and external that we're all swimming in. We're giving over my response, my personal response to the moment itself, to the conditional, lawful, very complex, interdependent world, right? So it's such a relief. And you can even reflect on this every morning. You're lying in bed, you've woken up, it's time to get up. But before we get out of bed, lying there, there's a sort of a joke that Sylvia Boorstein has in one of her books. I'll just have to paraphrase it, but it's like, so far, totally fine. My mind's really balanced. I haven't hit anybody, haven't gotten in an argument, I haven't acted out in unskillful ways, but pretty soon I'm going to have to get out of bed and get dressed and live my life, right? So we start in that relative simplicity of being in bed, or still being in our sort of secluded space in our bedroom. But we know as soon as we turn on the radio, or as soon as we start looking at the phone, or as soon as we head over to work, or as soon as we enter the relationship with the people we live with, things are going to get exponentially more complex. And we can, like I mentioned earlier, fall into that idea that, okay, I need a plan. So the way I'm going to defend myself from chaos is I'm going to have a plan. And when we cling to a plan, then we make other things wrong. We're in that dualistic world. My plan is right, other plans are wrong. Now, I'm not saying plans aren't good, but clinging and the mind being dependent on being right, that's not so helpful. Instead, we might, like, this is the reflection I'm suggesting, we're lying there. We know life is going to get more complex as we get out of bed and start living our day. So we resolve, like, what I really resolve for, what I'm really interested in is a kind of nimble balance. A balance that isn't dependent on whether the situation is going well or not well, whether I'm liked or I'm being disliked, whether the situation is pleasant or unpleasant, whether I think I know what I'm doing and I have a lot of competence, or I'm in some moment where I don't have much competence. I don't want to lose that balance. And the balance isn't like a stance. It's really this kind of love, like I really want to be useful to myself and to others. I want to contribute. And the way to do that is to maintain my balance. Because when I'm balanced, which is another way of saying when I'm unafraid, well, then I can connect. Being soft, not afraid, is a gift to ourself and to the world. I mean, imagine, we all know what it's like when we're around somebody who's tight and afraid. It activates our own habit of being tight and afraid. And we're around somebody who's really soft and open and in their own skin, as we sometimes say. It's such a powerful invitation to be who we are, not to feel like we have to be different or, present ourselves when somebody is like really okay being a human being with intestinal gas and, this and with that. And it's a real gift. So as you go forward in the evening, you might think about places in your life where you've noticed this equanimity and places in your life where it seemed to be lacking. And just unpack that a little bit, maybe in one of your in a comment, so we can start to reflect together about what is it in those places in my life where I already have a lot of balance. What is it that is allowing the heart and mind to have a lot of equanimity or more equanimity? And those other places, what is in the way of equanimity? Jennifer writes here, can you talk about balance when there is underlying depression? Yeah, well, this is the great chicken and egg phenomena, not just in Buddhism, but I think just generally in spiritual teachings. When we're really balanced and emotionally and physically and socially healthy, like we feel like we belong, we feel like we're loved, the mind's healthy and balanced, the body's healthy and balanced, then it's pretty easy. It's certainly relatively easy to see things as they are. It's relatively easy to be kind and wise and to develop kindness and wisdom. And when we're hurting, whether it's because of depression or any other, kind of difficult circumstance, inner or outer, Well, we see this in children when they're hit by suffering because of some difficult circumstance, they tend to revert and act as if they're younger than they are. Well, this doesn't stop when we have a big body and we're an adult. When we're overwhelmed with depression, that sort of emotional imbalance, whether it's regardless of what the underlying causes for the depression are, or financial insecurity, or whether it's an outer cause or an inner cause, when things are rough, it's really hard to be somebody who learns, right? So often, much of our lives, and just depends on our particular location and circumstance, but for sure, a lot of the time, we're not really interested in developing, we're not really capable of developing deep insight. What we're doing is the more foundational work of healing and stabilizing. And, in Buddhist terms, a lot of that work is just on the level of what we call sila, where we're taking care of our relationships with others just so that they're not going to haunt us. So if I've been a jerk over there, then how do I make amends over there so that the unhealed relationship I have with that person doesn't haunt me? So when my mind gets settled, then I go, oh God, I treated that person that way. I said that to that person. It haunts us, all that unfinished business. And it's the same thing with people who have had abuse or other kinds of difficulties or even trauma from the past. We have to use the effective tools to heal and to make amends and to take care of the wounds. And it's the same thing like now where the reality of racism is just more apparent because of, probably to a large degree, because of technology. And these little videos that are taken don't lie, and we're all faced with seeing things that were easier to dismiss when we didn't have that sort of visual image of somebody being killed before our eyes in a way that just clearly strikes the heart as being not right. And so then that's, now we're going to respond. And so this is the way it always is in spiritual life, human life, is when when have the good fortune and our life and the surroundings allow the heart to be more reflective and to do the more subtle work of looking for the roots of the deepest suffering, then we do that work. And then when outer circumstances, basically some version of survival gets triggered, whether it's on a social level or economic level or just in terms of just physically surviving an illness or violence, well, then of course we deal with that. And we deal with that still, we're still practicing, but we're really practicing on this more dense or gross level. Like, what does kindness look like when someone is attacking me? Or what does kindness look like? What does compassion look like when I see a video like that? And it can be sort of a shadow, like an escape, to think, oh no, I need to go meditate. I'm not saying we should stop meditating when things get intense. It's just that the balance shifts because something is calling for our attention. And can we find a skillful mind state that says, no, 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 I need to do that? Because when we look carefully, a lot of the no, 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 I'm a Buddhist who does a lot of meditation, we'll notice that there may be something off there. I mean, each of us have to figure it out for ourselves. We can't really judge other people in terms of the choices they're making, which is, sometimes common where people, like, why aren't you in the streets or something like that? But we do want to be aware of that shadow. Just like the shadow might be that I always, until the world is perfect, I'm not going to look within. Well, that's just as much of an ignorant, fixed response as I can't get engaged in the messy world until I'm a Buddha, until I do all my inner work. So it's really a dance of doing both, but in any moment, we might be more doing the external, orienting towards what's calling for our attention from the external world. In other moments, really retreating from what's going on in the external world and doing the more inner work. Thanks, Jennifer. And then Patricia writes here, feeling overwhelmed with grief, lots of crying. What does it mean to have equanimity in this? What does that look like? Well, there's nothing wrong with grief and sadness. It's really a question of what the mind is doing with it and whether it's identified with the grieving. What would balance look like when the heart is breaking? As we see things that we haven't seen clearly before, it might be like, for example, if we had a relatively superficial, simplistic view of things, and then new information came our way, and now our view of things is less simplistic and less superficial, well, there's a real grieving of we've lost ignorance, but the mind used to be dependent on that ignorance, and there will be a sense of loss and a sense of being born into something new that we don't understand. And maybe grieving happens. But sometimes the mind will get identified with the tears, but it's just another movement, just like laughter is another movement. Maybe it's okay, and you can even bring this phrase in, Patricia, is it okay for this grief, this emotion to be moving? Can it be given permission to move? Does it make me dysfunctional as I do what needs to be done, cook my food, make the call? And if it does, if it seems to be sort of a vortex that the mind gets lost in, then really look if ask the mind, like, what kind of meaning are you making up about this feeling of sadness? Because you might be able to have the sadness in a more simple way. Like, can there be the sadness without an explanation or defining it or telling ourselves what it's about? Because our actual subjective experience is there's this grief or there's this sadness, there's this trembling, this movement, this visceral whatever. And is it okay to soften and allow? Or do I need to defend and tighten? And just explore, like, I just want to be skillful. I just want to take care of this life. I don't want to create, traps that reverberate and cause more problems for myself and my relationships as things unfold. It's sort of profound when we realize, not just for others, but even for ourselves, that we can't take somebody's suffering away from them. And we can't take our own suffering away from us, from ourselves. We can only understand it. And then that changes who we are, it changes how we respond. But our job isn't to sort of put ourselves in opposition to suffering. Our job is to want to understand it. At least that's how the Buddha sort of lays it out. We don't understand things well enough to know how to respond. So we take the position of getting interested in suffering and the end of suffering. This is from Thanissara, The Grit That Becomes a Pearl. Thanissara is a well-known Dharma teacher in both the early Buddhist tradition, but others as well, later Buddhist traditions. And she practiced as a Buddhist nun in the Thai forest tradition for a number of years, but now is married to Kittasaro, and they teach together, have a retreat place in South Africa. She writes, as we listen more deeply to suffering, we begin to notice non-suffering. The heart realizes its innate courage, strength, and invincibility. This journey through pain and suffering burns away the impurities, and what is revealed is something pristine, clear, and beautiful, like a moonlit pearl, the tender, merciful heart, and its infinite ability to receive the cries of the world. So, any more comments from folks? We have a little bit of time. It'd be nice if there's some questions or even reflections that come to mind. And Win is here too. Win, feel free. Yeah, how does insight observation facilitate connection to the outside world? It's a good question. I mean, the one of the expressions of the deepening of insight is less fear. And the mind is experienced, the heart is experienced as being less dependent or less fixed. So then without that, without as much fear and without as much fixedness, like the mind always being fixed or attached to stances, to view, then that mind is more capable of seeing clearly, and then what I say and do and how I respond, it's going to come out of that more open, less fixed, less fearful place. It will be more useful. So that's the thing. Insight, we're understanding, and the flavor of that deepening of insight is non-fear, not being fixed. And sometimes, we'll call it being light or released or open. But the functional difference is that the mind is less governed by fear and greed and dependence. And that just is, it's really in a spiritual sense, it is the definition of competence, right? Because that mind can be competent not because it knows everything, right? There are probably really wise, awakened beings who don't have a lot of worldly knowledge. They just have had limited experiences, so they don't have that cumulative experience to sort of tell them what to do in a particular situation. But they're extremely good learners because there's no fixedness and fear coloring how they're seeing a particular moment. So how they show up in that moment and how they respond will really have a great breadth and depth and nimbleness. And that's one of the things you see with people who practice a lot. They just tend to be fresher when they're doing their life. And it's really great when you have that opportunity to hang out with people who've been practicing for a while. And that's really how you can tell. It's not enough to look at somebody's resume and see how many retreats they've done, or they practice with this great teacher or that great teacher. You really need to hang out with them when things are a little sticky and and don't go the way they want things to go, and just see how they do their own particular dance of life, and how they manage when there's pain in the body, and when they have a headache, and when traffic is bad, and and is their mind constantly getting entangled, getting in tight places, and then acting out of that tight place in a way that makes other people tight? Well, I'm not interested in practicing in a way that leads there, right? Are you? I don't think so. We're interested in practicing in a way that goes in a different direction. And, whether we call that freedom or lightness or nimbleness or release, a heart that's released. But I think in terms of what we've talked about tonight, it really has that flavor of non-fear and non-fixedness. Any other thoughts before we wrap up our time? Even just reflections about how you've been showing up, especially those of you here in the Twin Cities. Yeah, just taking advantage of our spiritual community to check in. We have a few more minutes.
Can you just say a few more words about competence in our spiritual work and competence in the world?
Yeah, so Wynn, if you didn't hear that, asked about what's the difference between competence in the world and competence in terms of our spiritual insight. And generally, competence in the world means we're living our life and the mind is paying attention to some degree, and it's doing that sort of preliminary cause and effect comprehending. Oh, yeah, when I do this, this happens. And that's true like with knitting, or you're being a ceramist, or being a cook, or being a lawyer, or any number of things that we might do, including being in relationship with other people. It's just basic competence of cause and effect. And where that becomes spiritual is when the mind gets interested in taking the learning of cause and effect to the nth degree. So the mind is now sort of interested in the bigger picture. And when the mind gets interested in the bigger picture, it's looking at cause and effect, and it realizes everything is cause and effect. Everything is a natural conditional process. And it's really starting to integrate that insight that it's nature and not self. So what that does, because from a self point of view, when I'm studying karma, cause and effect from a self point of view, I really want to learn it. I really want to be competent. I want to see when I do this, I get that. But all of it seems personal. Like, how can I be more competent? How can I be better at this and better at that? So there's always a little tightness to it. But when I understand the truth of karma, cause and effect, conditionality, to the nth degree, I realize there's nothing outside of it. And then it really helps me deal with the world of cause and effect without being tight about it. And that's where spiritual insight, spiritual competency is understanding that karma, cause and effect, doesn't refer back to anybody. Worldly competency is understanding that cause and effect is relevant. It's my teacher, and it helps me be good at anything. If we watch, observe cause and effect, we'll get better at whatever understanding, whatever we're observing. But we're always going to be sensing it from like me having some power because I understand cause and effect. And there's always some tension there. It's better to be competent as a self than incompetent, not know how things work. But still being a somebody who wants to be competent, it's still a stressful spiritual position. And how to be a human being with responsibilities without tightness. That's the question that spiritual practice addresses. Yeah, and one more before we end, again from Carolyn. George Floyd's death has brought an opening to conversation with my four sisters about racism. We are in a flow now, a dance of ebb and flow, and I'm interested and encouraged experiencing it. And this, I'm really happy to hear that, Carolyn. And I feel, as a white person, that this is a real opening for all of us white people, because I think, it's generally accepted by people who've been very reflective about what it means to be white, that part of what it means to be white is not to talk about race in a deep way and to somehow think race is something that's relevant for other people. That's really one of the strong and subtle characteristics of whiteness. And so when white people start to talk about race and to realize its relevance, how much of our society and just just this dance of community we're part of, is an expression of racial conditioning. It's a real step. But of course, the reason we don't talk about it is it's scary for us to talk about it. And, I've really been reflective, especially these last 10 years, but, always interested and always thought of myself as someone with some competence around race. I can now laugh at that. Um, but always like talking with my family about race or talking with some of my friends about race was always and is now still a scary thing, like a no-go zone, basically, in a lot of my relationships. And I've had now a racial affinity group, a group of guys around my age, white men. We meet once a month now for several years, and just practice talking about race. And we read books that kind of help the conversation. But it's really powerful for me, I think, again, as a white person, to learn how to talk about race and to be a student of my racial conditioning. And I think that's one of the powerful ways we can start unraveling the deep, deep roots of racism in our society. And then Robert here, I often find that I operate out of once hurt, twice shy. Please speak about how we operate through our causes and conditions. Yeah, but because you see that, Robert, you're not completely caught. You couldn't write what you just wrote and being completely caught in that once hurt, twice shy. And probably, at the very least, you're curious about that pattern of being once hurt, twice shy, in the sense of like seeing it playing itself out and then just wondering in a non-aggressive way, do I need to be shy? What might be another way that I might respond? Because it might feel scary to speak up and say something, but it might, and it might be messy actually, like you might get some pushback, but the aftertaste, the reverberation later might feel like really light, like, oh, that felt right. That felt really good. So really great to be with everybody tonight. So glad that you had the interest in showing up, and lots happening at the center. So use the public calendar to see what's coming up in the next days and weeks. The community practice intensive is beginning on Monday night. Everybody's welcome to join in for that. I think there's still some spaces, and it will be for about 19 days, ending with an online day-long retreat somewhere, I think around the 22nd or so of June. And wishing everybody a lot of love and ease and comfort and fearless engagement in our world that needs us to show up right now. So be well, everybody, and have a peaceful night.